You can live with just one kidney or a single lung, but whoever thought you could live a normal life with only half a brain? Most of us can't even live without our cell phone for more than a few hours. I am not talking about a concussion or a stroke or brain damage, but the complete absence of half of our brain. Most of us would think that that is an impossible idea. A human brain contains about 86 billion neurons or brain cells. Imagine that one day you decide to count nonstop until you get to 1 billion. Let's assume that you could count one number every second on average, so it would take you 1 billion seconds. After doing the math, this means that it would take approximately 32 years to count to 1 billion. And it would take about 2,750 years to count to 86 billion. Yet in only 9 months during pregnancy, a human brain with 86 billion cells, yet in only 9 months of pregnancy, a human brain with 86 billion brain cells is formed. Yet in only 9 months of pregnancy, a human brain with 86 billion neurons is formed. A single brain cell isn't very smart by itself, but when they are connected in huge networks, they produce awesome things. They produce amazing things like intelligence, personality, memories, emotions, language, movement, and consciousness. We can perceive and think and dream. They are us, and they create our reality every second of our lives. This is really something momentous and mysterious. At any instant, one brain cell may be receiving and sending thousands of tiny messages. Everything you do, think, and feel can be traced back to these tiny cells and the trillions of connections. You may have a few hundred Facebook friends, but each brain cell has thousands of friends that it communicates with every second of the day, even while you are asleep. Your brain works hard 24/7, and it never complains, even when you take it for granted. Never any ghosting or ignoring messages, no matter how small. Your brain only stops working on rare occasions, like when you are taking a really important exam, or going for a job interview, or when you fall in love and all critical thought comes to a sudden stop. The first few years of a child's life are a time of rapid brain growth. The newborn has all of its 86 billion brain cells and already has some connections to other neurons, but not a lot. According to the Center on the Developing Child at Harvard University, a baby's brain develops about 1 million new connections every second. So most brain development will happen in early childhood, but new connections can form anytime throughout our lives. Neural connections are formed as the newborn learns new skills, such as walking or talking, or else new information about the world, such as what is a tree, a dog, a toy, a cookie, and so on. All new learning requires the creation of new connections among neurons in the brain. If these physical changes don't happen, then there is no learning of any type. Our brain is divided into 2 halves, or hemispheres, and they work closely together. They are connected by a small bundle of nerves called the corpus callosum. The main role of the corpus callosum is to allow information to flow easily from one side of the brain to the other. It allows us to read with both eyes and sides of the brain in one seamless experience. Riding a bike is another example of an activity that involves the corpus callosum. Both sides of the brain control physical actions on one side of the body, and the corpus callosum communicates information between the two sides to smoothly coordinate these movements. And so you can ride your bike down the street without falling over to one side and without jerky, awkward movements. The two hemispheres, though not perfectly the same, are approximately mirror images of each other. One big difference is that language functions are almost always located only on the left side, in the vicinity just above your left ear. It may seem peculiar, but the left side of the brain controls the right side of the body, and the right hemisphere controls the left side of your body. So if you want to throw a ball with your right hand, the command comes from the left brain and travels to your right arm and hand. Likewise, if you accidentally hit your left finger with a hammer, the pain messages are sent to the right brain, which then signals you to say ouch, or perhaps some other four-letter word. So damage to one side of the brain affects the opposite side of the body. The brain isn't hardwired the way a computer is. The wiring in our brain is flexible and always changing. The brain's lifelong ability to change and repair itself is called plasticity or neuroplasticity. This is the ability to change, rewire, and repair itself. This is really important when it comes to recovery from damage due to strokes or accidents. It's also one important way that our brain differs from computers. The human brain demonstrates a miraculous ability to self-heal after a brain injury or stroke. Some abilities can be regained if areas near the damaged site take over the lost function. As we age, the rate of change in the brain, or plasticity, decreases, but doesn't ever come to a halt. So depending on age and severity of damage, there are limits to this self-healing process. It's never going to be perfect. You can imagine it like this. When a street or highway entrance has been blocked along your daily commute, the GPS may suggest an alternative route. This alternate route may be unfamiliar and take a little bit longer, but it will still lead you to your destination. The same concept can be applied to plasticity. Jody Miller started suffering from severe seizures when she was 3 years old. She would suddenly lose complete control of her left side, causing her to fall down or fall over. Until then, her development was textbook normal. No one suspected that there might be anything wrong. She was eventually diagnosed with Rasmussen encephalitis, which eats away one side of the brain like a Pac-Man, but never goes over to the other side. As it damages tissue, it causes frequent and uncontrollable seizures and paralysis on the opposite side of the body. When every known treatment failed, the last resort doctors had was something called hemispherectomy, a procedure where half of the brain is surgically removed. It was really hard for Jody's parents to consider this as good news. They had to hope for a miracle. Jody had her surgery when she was 3 years old. The doctors, and likewise the parents, could not be sure about the outcome of the procedure. It was a scary time for everyone. First, before the surgery, the patient's hair is cut. Before the surgery, the patient's hair is cut or shaved over part of her head. The child is then given anesthesia. The child is then given anesthesia so she feels no pain or discomfort during the surgery. And also she cannot move, since any movement at all could be a disaster for the very meticulous and precise surgery. The surgeon removes part of the skull before taking out the side of the brain that isn't working properly. The piece of skull is then put back and stitched into place. Jody's dangerous operation took more than 12 hours. Doctors had to be careful not to do any damage to vital areas such as the brainstem, which controls important things like breathing and heart function. The vacant space in the right side of her skull filled with, right after the surgery, the vacant space in the right side of her skull started filling with cerebral fluid, the same stuff that bathes the brain and spinal cord, so there is no major problem in that respect. Since our whole brain has about 86 billion brain cells, removing the right side would destroy more than 40 billion neurons. And they are gone forever because it is impossible to replace those lost brain cells. Maybe one day we will become so advanced medically that we'll be able to order extra brain cells through Amazon and get them with 2-day delivery. But right now, we can't do that. And we won't be able to do it tomorrow or next year. It will be a long time before we are able to replace our. It will be a very long time before we will be able to replace missing brain cells. Remarkably, the surgery was a complete success. With the right half of her brain removed, we would expect complete paralysis on the left side of her body. But that's not what happened. Over a short time, Jody's left hemisphere took control over both sides of her body. Jody did not grow any new brain cells. Instead, the left side of her brain created trillions of brand new connections as a way to restore and replace her lost functions. Within less than 10 days, Jody was walking again, with both legs being controlled by her left brain. She started taking ballet lessons as a form of physiotherapy to stimulate brain development even further. Today, Jody is 30 years old. She has graduated college, won scholarships and awards, and is living a normal, healthy life. All with only a half a brain. Now an adult, Miller has been married for several years and says she's very thankful that her parents went forward with the risky decision to have the surgery. Younger children do best with this operation because their brains are more easily able to compensate for the missing half. Because the procedure is so uncommonly performed in older age groups, less is known about the outcomes. Hemispherectomy is reserved for the most extreme cases where the individual's seizures do not respond to medications. The youngest person to ever have a hemispherectomy was 3 months old, and the oldest person was in his 30s. Children's brains are constantly growing, developing, and changing. Because of these rapid changes already occurring in the young child, brain injuries can be more quickly and completely repaired. Plasticity continues throughout life, but becomes less effective into adulthood. You have trillions of cells in your body, and each one is working hard to do a specific job every second of the day. Your body's functions are on autopilot. To do their work, all cells need to be fed. They need nutrients and oxygen all the time to survive. We have many blood vessels throughout our body and brain that constantly carry this nourishment to all of our cells. That's why we eat a few times a day, so our cells are always being fed. Brain cells are special in many ways. If blood flow stops, even for a short time, such as about 4 minutes, they will die. Once dead, they cannot be replaced. They are gone forever. There is no second chance. When strokes occur in the brain, blood stops or is interrupted. This will generally lead to the death of thousands or millions of brain cells, depending on how serious the stroke is. If the stroke occurs at a major artery, then damage will be much worse. Most people assume strokes only happen to older people, but sometimes children can have strokes too. Childhood strokes are under-recognized and diagnosis is often delayed due to this lack of awareness. Though rare, strokes can even happen to babies still waiting in the womb to be born. This is what happened to Ozzy, who is now an energetic and science-loving 7-year-old. He is always busy playing with his little sister, making up stories about his favorite stuffed animal named Bunny. He dreams about being a zoologist or paleontologist when he grows up. But sometimes he wants to be a police officer or a fighter. But sometimes he wants to be a policeman or a fireman. When you are young, nothing is impossible. But Ozzy's journey through childhood was far from normal or easy. When he was born, it was a very long and difficult delivery process. A few hours after birth, a nurse noticed some unusual leg and eye movements. Ozzy was transferred to the intensive care unit at Stanford Medicine Children's Hospital. Within 24 hours after birth, his parents were told that he had experienced a large middle cerebral artery stroke, likely in the final week of pregnancy. This is one of the largest arteries in the brain. In Ozzy's case, it caused serious brain injury, destroying 85% of the left hemisphere of his brain. With a neonatal stroke, scar tissue forms in the brain. Sometimes it short-circuits nerves, causing seizures, and children may eventually develop epilepsy. Ozzy remained free of seizures between the ages of 1 and 4 years. Life felt normal for Ozzy and his family. He was a happy, curious, and a thriving kid. When Ozzy turned 4 years old, his mom, Stephanie, started seeing odd behaviors. He became unfocused, frazzled, and sometimes even destructive. He had trouble finding words and stringing sentences together. Processing new information and remembering old information became really difficult at times. All of this made him frustrated. Ozzy was experiencing seizures, but they were not obvious to the untrained eye. Ozzy's odd behavior became even worse. One day he awoke groggy, had trouble dressing, and a little later struggled to sit up. Then he started convulsing in the back seat of the car. His dad immediately called 911 and an ambulance rushed Ozzy to the local hospital where he was treated for a large seizure. It was really scary, but when he woke up in the hospital the next day, he seemed fine. Mostly he was upset that he didn't remember the ambulance ride because he loves ambulances and fire trucks. To find out what caused the seizure, Ozzy's parents brought him back to Stanford Medicine Children's Health for an examination and an electroencephalogram, or EEG, which monitors brain activity. Ozzy's EEG revealed that all night long his brain was having tiny seizures, leaving him mentally and physically exhausted. They tried all possible medicines over the course of 2 years, but he was getting worse instead of better. They couldn't go on this way. Something had to be done. Since medicines were not working for Ozzy, his doctor suggested another approach which sounded unbelievable: a surgery to disconnect the two sides of Ozzy's brain to stop the seizures. Disconnecting half of a child's brain seems a little crazy, but it is an important option. It's a highly complex surgery that's reserved for the most serious cases of epilepsy. When the connection between the healthy and unhealthy halves of the brain is cut, seizures cannot spread. This would stop the seizures from spreading to the other side and interrupting his healthy brain activity. But there was little choice since Ozzy's condition was getting worse all the time. Because Ozzy had a stroke before birth that basically destroyed the left side of his brain, the right side took over all functions early on. This meant that functions like speech, memory, and vision were now performed by his healthy right side. His left side had become almost useless because 85% of the brain cells had been destroyed by the stroke. So already, Ozzy's brain had repaired itself in an amazing way. Doctors ran several tests, including a functional MRI, to confirm it. Ozzy is bilingual, so the team tested him for both English and German, and they saw that his brain was exclusively lighting up in the right hemisphere. This was because the healthy side of his brain had completely taken over these important functions that normally would have been handled by his left side. It took several hours to perform the operation because all nerves crossing from left to right along the corpus callosum had to be cut. They could not leave any path for the seizures. They could not leave any path for the seizures to take from one side of the brain to the other. The surgeon had to make sure he disconnected all the tracks. This would prevent any seizures in the left side from spreading to the healthy right side of the brain. Even with extensive testing and planning, the moment of truth is when the child wakes up from surgery. Stephanie will never forget that first visit with Dr. Grant when he gave her 2 thumbs up after visiting Ozzy just a few hours after the surgery. His left side still shows little discharges, but since the brain is disconnected, they cannot travel to the healthy right side of his brain, and so are completely harmless. Ozzy has improved in many unexpected ways following his surgery. The healthy part of the brain is free to work properly, no longer tormented by the damaged part. His world is now full of new sights, sounds, and thoughts. After surgery, Ozzy was so excited by all the input. His mind was working so much faster, and he couldn't stop talking and asking questions. In years to come, his doctors say that people will never know that he had major brain surgery and now has only half a brain that is operating. Best yet, he's seizure-free. His quality of life is dramatically different, and today he's a healthy 7-year-old living a full, happy life. Humans are incredible creatures. Even with half of your brain removed, you are still able to function in a normal way. That is truly nothing short of incredible. The plasticity of the brain is an astounding miracle.